Hello, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm always good.
Great.
Always good. First of all, what are the children of God for those that are unfamiliar with it?
Okay, so the Children of God was started by a man named David Berg. He was a former Christian and Missionary Alliance pastor. He comes from a lineage of pastors. Actually, his mother, Virginia Brandberg, was a massive traveling pastor as well. He started in 1968 during the time of the hippie movement, so we're talking like Woodstock times. And he basically would go down to Huntington Beach in California around that time and met a lot of the young people. And he felt like a lot of them were very lost, very confused. They were kind of, at the time, a lot of the teenagers from that generation were breaking out of their shell of 9 to 5 work. They wanted to do something a bit more exciting. They wanted to travel or whatever it was, my parents included. And he basically started to minister to these young people, but show a different side, a more exciting, liberated view of religion and Jesus and God. That was very different from what a lot of people were used to in the church system of religion, Catholicism or whatever it is, what have you. So he, in 1969, he had a revelation that California would be hit by a major earthquake, which, of course, as we know, didn't happen. So a lot of the ethos of the group starts from the Bible verse, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." So he took that to heart. So he started the group as a way to extend and spread the word of God through, again, like some very controversial ways and practices. And so at one point we were really huge around the world, and we've gone by different names, mainly to evade the law and to rebrand to kind of get away from some of the more darker sides of the cult. So that's kind of, I would say, sort of a summation of the group.
What names?
So the first one is Children of God. Then there was another one which I cannot really remember because, again, it was from the early days, way before I was born. The next major one that maybe some people will also recognize or have heard of is the Family International, and that was the name that I kind of grew up in. That when it kind of, after it had been rebranded, after a time we called the persecution, where places like England, Australia, France, Argentina, there was many raids on our communes in those countries. So kids were taken away, put into foster care while they were investigating allegations of child. So yeah.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So your parents joined first.
Yeah, they joined around about the 70s, but not in America. So my dad joined in France and my mother joined in Denmark, and they were both led to and directed to move to Paris and around Paris, and they met there and got together and got married and started having children in the group and started focusing and doing a lot of what we called missionary work or witnessing, which was going out and just talking to random people in the street, bringing out literature, different pamphlets that people could read about and learn about the cult, and also learn about just Jesus and different things.
How many kids? How many kids did they have?
So in the cult, we were very, again, another Bible verse that really was like part of the ethos of the group from the beginning. Well, not from the beginning, from by the time that they wanted to start branching out and starting families, was be fruitful and multiply. So they took that to heart. So I'm the youngest of seven. I've got five sisters and a brother.
And do you all stay in contact?
Yeah, we've all stayed in contact. Things in that respect have been positive. I'm in contact with my parents, and of course, none of us in our family are part of the group at all. And yeah, so
How did you leave? What made you leave?
well, okay, so I didn't leave. Well, so basically, there was a time around the 2000s, early 2000s, where the group started to realize that, sorry, the leadership started to realize, and the leader at the time, which was the wife or kind of girlfriend, I don't know if they were ever legally married, but the wife, called Karen Zerby, who basically took over leadership once David Berg died, which was in 1994. she took over. And as time progressed, and I think into the 2000s, she started to realize basically that cults, and I think in general, people started realizing that cults societally, and looking through it through a sociological kind of point or perspective, cults were more monitored. The world was just more monitored, and there was more safety and security reasons that could put members and our reputations at risk. So I think what sort of happened was she started to get the feeling that we needed to sort of merge and blend into normal society, because of course in the cult, up until the age of like 15, 16, I had never been to public school. We were not allowed to socialize in our free time with anyone outside of the group. So while I was traveling to countries like South Africa, living in Ghana for a year, traveling through Italy, Spain, all around France, just different countries, we were not allowed to socialize with people. The only time we were allowed to kind of socialize with them is if they were receptive to the message that we were bringing to them, which was about Jesus and God's love, and if they were buying our products, because we also got into like it's called Aurora Productions, which was like a certified sort of printing press or kind of business online and in some small little stores around the world, where we would produce calendars, we would produce videos, entertainment things for young children and for adults included, just a whole variety of stuff. So we were selling these things, hawking them off to make money, because of course we didn't have jobs. So going back to the kind of how our family left the cult. The leader, Karen Zerby, kind of decided that we need to blend in. So she started sending out some letters to all the members of the cult, everyone into different communes and the different homes that we would be living in around the world, and basically said, now it's time to go into society, join society fully, get back in touch with your relatives that have never been in the cult, find jobs, go to school. But I mean, it was very much, a lot of us are actually a little bit upset about how it all went down, because there was no safety net. A lot of us basically were living on next to nothing and had nothing to fall back on. Some of the members, the first generation members, the ones that first initially joined the cult, had nothing. You know what I mean? Like a lot of them, their family had cut them off because they were like, what the hell is my brother or sister doing in this creepy cult? They're not coming to visit. They've whenever we've talked to them to say like, how are you doing, or come and visit, they're like, no, we cannot. The God tells us that you are bad. We'd call them goats. It's a weird term. We call people who are like anti-cult goats, and ones that were receptive and interested in the cult, call them sheep. So we had lots of different weird terms for different things. But yeah, so it's very upsetting actually. A lot of people didn't get any money, didn't get anything back, whereas we in the group, the kind of the worker bees, if you want to call them that, were sending money to the leadership constantly every single month. So a lot of the money that we were making through selling these things, we weren't seeing a return. We were having to basically, we called it provisioning, where we pretty much would go to different companies, different organizations, different businesses, and try and get money from them, or have them give us, like, donate free food, because a lot of us were like living on next to nothing. We had a term called live by faith, and that's kind of the environment that I grew up in, where like it wasn't about working hard and making your money and having an honest living. It was more like, no, like, let God take care of you, and whatever we kind of need to do. We never did anything really criminal in that respect to get money, but anything we needed to do to make money, to get people involved in the group. Any rich people were basically considered, we call them kings and queens, because they were considered like, oh, if you can get a king or a queen, aka a rich person, to get interested in the group, to buy what we were selling, and to support us, that was like, wow, okay, that's a good get. So yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the core beliefs of the religion.
Yeah,
no, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like,
All right. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. So the core beliefs, it's funny. It started off with, like I said before, about witnessing, about basically go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. So like, get yourselves out there, spread yourselves around. And the leader was constantly having visions and dreams where he would have like, okay, now everyone needs to go to the tropics, which is basically like going to like East Asia, going to Africa, going to Australia, to be spread out from where the group started, which was America. and go and like travel around, open new communes in England, in Spain, in Thailand. I mean, we were like almost operating in every single country around the world, roughly. So that was one of the core beliefs. That's one of the main things. And as time progressed, he was a very disturbed person. As a child, the leader David Berg had always had this proclivity towards sex, and saying that like the church in which he grew up in, the church they're very kind of prim and proper and are kind of a little bit like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know the word I'm going for. Basically, like not really glorifying sex or not making sex as like a thing that they discussed in church. So he hated that. He wanted to normalize or destigmatize free sex amongst everyone. So one of the core beliefs was it's okay to have sex with children. It's okay to introduce them to sex at a very, very young age. And we're talking toddlers. We're talking children, little children being exposed to orgies between men and women. We're talking him sending out letters. One of them was called Glorify God in the Dance, which is basically was like all these rules of how he wanted young girls to dress for him, take videos and send it to him. So he would say like, make sure she's wearing see-through revealing clothing, make sure she's dancing in a very sexually provocative way, and send them to me. So these are some of the core beliefs. He loved the idea of children being exposed to sex because he said it was a beautiful thing. It's a natural thing. God wants us to prepare these children from a very young age. And not just that, he married his own granddaughter. And he said, I now wed thee, gave her a ring. And he engaged in sexual acts with her, and not only her, but other young children in his household, which was with like his girlfriend Karen Zerby, who again assumed the role of leadership after he died, and a variety of other kids that he would travel with. And this is not a man, we're not talking about a man who kind of flew under the radar. We're talking about a leader who was being investigated by the authorities in America. And I don't know, he came into a lot of money. We were sending money to them. So basically the money that we used was funneled in, or the money that he used from us members was used to assume different identities. So he had all these aliases, fake passports. So the minute that they would have any idea that maybe they were going to get raided, or police or the authorities were going to come to one of his secret locations where he was living, whether it was in Tenerife, he moved so much. So the minute it would happen, they would be packing up, leaving, going to the airport or going around. And the funny thing was, when every couple weeks we would get a packet of letters and letters from him of like his updates of what he was doing. And he'd always be like, thank the Lord, we evaded the law yet again. It was like that. So this is a man they were really hoping to catch him, but he died before anything could happen. So the immediate children and his relatives and the children that grew up around him in the household that he had never got justice. And he remained, innocent in a sense. Like he felt like whatever he did was right. So he could sleep at night thinking that everything he did was right, and never got put into a courtroom.
So what was your childhood like early on?
So for my childhood, this is where it's kind of the dichotomy of that. So it started off that way. So we're talking free sex. We're talking also, I forgot to mention, which I kind of wanted to mention, which I think is kind of leads into that, is we had a certain belief at one point for a couple years in the 80s, I think, called flirty fishing, which was basically sending the women out to have sex with non-members, rich men, and showing them God through sex, basically prostitutes. So he basically whored out members of our group. And luckily it stopped after a while, because I think they were worried about AIDS and sexually transmitted diseases, and we were all about free love and free sex. So at some point they stopped it. But I was born during the time when the rebrand had happened, right after the persecution in France. So I was born in France, and the persecution kind of ended around 93. So I was raised knowing about this stuff, because these letters and these documents and videos and things were still in circulation within the group. So I was raised not in that lifestyle, not growing up in that really in that environment at all. But I had access to it. I had the information. I was allowed to see some of this stuff. I was allowed to see drawings of little kids fondling each other and touching each other, and having God smiling over them and saying, I now, I'm blessing these children. I'm blessing this man and this woman together, or I'm blessing this man and this 8-year-old girl together. But I was exposed to that. But of course, growing up in the cult and growing up in a cult, obviously I was brainwashed from the minute I was, could speak. So for me, it was normalized, but I grew up mainly traveling. So my biggest issue with the cult and with my upbringing and with my parents and how they raised me was so much traveling, so much so much traveling, and then also just a lot of corporal punishment. So punishment was a big thing. He also was a big proponent of that. Children needed to be whipped into shape. Like, we're talking basically treating the children like soldiers. We had to put on a happy smiling face whenever we were out in public. Or if we didn't, and they noticed that, the people in the homes and the communes that we lived in, the other members that we would live with, when we get home, it'd be strict hour-long sessions of talking about it, of really giving us like very intense lectures about it, and then go into the next room and being spanked or being hit or whatever, using variety of different things, a shoe, or some of them were beaten with hoses. Some people, especially if they were in certain homes with certain members who had a very big temper, it was allowed for them to just go ham on these children. You know what I mean? And luckily, I didn't get to that point where I was beaten to that level, but I've been beaten. I've experienced that, and that's the psychological trauma of that from a young age, especially when you drag religion into it, and it's like, Jesus loves you. It's Jesus spanking you. It's Jesus giving you this thing to make you a better warrior for him, a better member in his army, is what we would kind of call it. So that was really strange and jarring and hard to kind of accept once I left the cult, was that I went through that stuff.
Yeah. At what age did you realize it was a cult?
Yeah, I kind of languished over this question because it's very, it's such a weird thing. I think only an ex-member of a cult could understand without having me to explain it so much. But to explain it to someone who's never grown up or been a part of a cult, I think it's just a gradual realization is what it is. I remember when I was living in South Africa as a young boy, I felt so neglected, and neglect is a form of abuse. I don't know if people think about it in that way, but neglect really is a form of abuse. And I felt neglected. No one was prioritizing my well-being. So I was left to my own devices. I didn't really have anybody that cared about me. My dad had split up from my mother at this point, and I was living with my mom and a couple of my siblings, and no one cared about my schooling. No one, I did that on my own. If I wanted to learn something, if I wanted to learn about history, if I wanted to learn about my, addition and subtraction, I had to do that on my own. We had books and stuff like that in the house, but it was never prioritized. What was prioritized is that we needed to prepare ourselves mentally for the end of the world, which has been prophesied in the Bible as like the end time. And we were told that that was the thing, keeping a lot of young kids in a state of fear and panic that, at any time Jesus will come back. And we were raised believing that we were going to have superpowers, that God was going to bless our cult, only us, with superpowers, that we could fight the bad guys, the non-members, the evil people on the outside, and then Jesus would come back and start, heaven on earth, basically. So, sorry.
No, was there, because there's a mental element to learning the cult. Was there a physical element other than the beatings? Like, did you have to train? You have to get stronger? Do you have to learn to fight? Like, because if you're preparing for the end of the world, I would presume there's an element of some kind of martial arts or chi powers. I've seen a lot of that.
Actually, that's a great question, because that can lead me into another one of the other really big controversies from the group. So back in the 80s, there was almost prison camps that were created for the teenagers and the young children that were considered bad apples, that would infect the whole bunch of apples of the kids. It's like a metaphor that we used. So these were, they were called victor camps, and kids that were sent there, their parents would allow it to happen. And sometimes the parents were forced to let their children go there if their children had been not listening, talking back to the elders, not wanting to go out and and witness, not wanting to go out and talk to these people, didn't have the mental capacity to go out and have to put on this smiling mask and this ecstatic way to basically draw other people in and become members. They use the children a lot, which I think really, it strikes at people's heartstrings when you trot out all these kids that are saying like, hello, we're part of this group, please support us, please can you help us with food for a dinner or a hot meal, you know what I mean? So yeah, anyway, going back to the kind of training thing, these Victor camps were put in places like Macau, Peru, I don't know, various locations. There were a couple of them, and anyone that was sent there had the most horrific time. They were put to work, and they were the ones that were really treated like soldiers. They had to do physical, hard manual labor for hours on end. They were beaten. They had signs put around their neck saying, "Do not talk to me because I'm on silence restriction." And sometimes that would go for months. There's a woman actually called Bexy Cameron. She's an English woman that went through some of that stuff from that generation, and she's written a book, and she details how that was, the silence restriction stuff, which was very psychologically damaging. But yeah, training was a big thing in those groups, in those camps, I mean, the Victor camps. And those were shut down around the time that Lord Justice Ward, a judge in England, actually basically brought the group and some of its members into the courtroom, and of course was trying to see if maybe these people needed to be arrested or the group needed to be forcibly shut down. One of his stipulations for the reason why he thought the group could just remain and these people were not going to be arrested or put in jail for life, which is what some of them deserved, he said that those camps need to be shut down because they were horrific. I mean, sexual abuse was prevalent in those groups, those camps, and extreme physical abuse was also prevalent.
Yeah. How did your family end up leaving the Children of God?
Yeah. So again, that was like tying back into what I was saying when you asked the question about the different names of the cult. So when after a couple years or a while after the group was known as the Family International, there was the rebrand, and then eventually there was something called the reboot, which was basically, like I said before, how Karen Zerby, the second leader of the group, wanted us to all blend into society, and that's when my family left. I think we were already on our way out a year or two before that officially became a decree for the cult. My dad especially kind of was realizing in the last couple of years, like, this is no way for my kids to kind of grow up. Society, everything was modernizing at this point, and he thought like, okay, my kids need to have a proper education before it's too late. So that's when we left. That's how we left. There was no like scary, traumatic thing of like, we have to run away from this group, or, people are going to draw us back in. At this point, it was fully accepted and encouraged people to join society.
Do you still have any contact with any of your old cult friends?
Yeah. So like I said before, like we traveled a lot. So we met a lot of other young members. And as we got older, we went to things called fellowships, where we would have, like, for example, in Italy, there was a massive one. So all the homes, all the communes that were in Italy would all meet at some like massive like hotel or something that we rented out, because we would provision it. So like, rich people, like I said before, would donate things to us, would gift us certain things, and gave us for free locations that we could all congregate together and have these big moments together. So of course I made loads of friends. However, only a couple of them would I say are close friends, because I think for cult members, psychologically, I think once you end up being sort of deprogrammed from a cult or leave a cult, there's two things that can happen. Either you become super tight-knit and close and have close connection with other members who have left to kind of have like a support system in place, or you have it where you're like, which is how I had it, to be honest, and some of my family, some of my siblings also had it, where we were like, no, it's time to kind of shut the door on that. Let's focus on our own individual lives, on our own individual family. Let's not be dragged into rehashing the past and all of the trauma that we all went through and had to live through and survived in the cult. Let's just focus on, for example, schooling. So I went to secondary school in England. I went to college and university as well. And I focused on that. That was like a thing that I needed to do. But as time went on, I did start getting back into touch with some of the old family members, because there was, after a while, like the suppressing a lot of that stuff, suppressing and ignoring a lot of that stuff in those people became a little bit too hard psychologically. And I wanted to have that safety net again, have those people that I could talk to and be like, have like inside jokes with. Like, do you remember that one guy that we lived with who was so weird, and he was from, I don't know, Zimbabwe, and we found it funny the way he ate food, silly things like that. It was again a way to remind ourselves of like some of the good things or some of the funny things to kind of, you know what I mean? Because you feel a little bit like an alien when you leave a cult. You do. And I definitely felt like that. I had to really, you know what I mean, kind of get my confidence up. I had to kind of push away any anxieties or fear or panic about having to be around people that had no idea what I'd been through and that were not involved in cults. They were just average young people that had been born and raised in the same city or town that they still lived in. So it was a moment. It was difficult.
What was joining a secondary school in the UK like after that life?
So I started in year 11. So that was my first foray into normal life. My family had, by this point, my dad at this point had rented a house for me and my siblings to live in. My mom at this point had been traveling a bit and was living away from us at this time. And it was actually really positive. I was young, you know what I mean? I left as the youngest in my family. I was the youngest at the time. So around 15, 16 was around the time that I joined school. And I really liked it. I have a big personality. A lot of young people that grew up in the cult, like I said, we had to kind of put on this sort of mask of like performance, going out away from the communes to basically witness to people, to bring them in or whatever. So I think I pulled a little bit of that into going to school, like excited to make friends, fully excited to kind of, test the waters of normal life. So for me, it was very positive.
Is there anything about that life that you miss?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well. I guess I miss sort of the camaraderie, the community spirit that you have. When you're out in the world, you don't really have that. I mean, you have your school friends, you have certain little communities, you have your work friends, but having like so many people around you at all hours of the day was what I grew up in and what was so normal to me for so many years. So I found it very, that part of it was kind of fun, very social, very active, going out, getting to travel the world. I miss that. I miss being able to travel and live in new cultures and experience new cultures, new foods, new places. So I kind of miss that. And I kind of miss the closest I had with some of my friends in the group, but that's about it.
What happened to the leader, Karen?
So Karen Zerby, just to give a little bit of a backstory on Karen Zerby, she got together with the leader, David Berg, quite young. She was very young. He got rid of his first wife because she started to figure out that this was too much, the cult and the way in his teachings. So she had children with her, and then once they divorced and she left the group, he got with Karen Zerby and groomed her basically from a young age to be involved and to fully accept anything he would say. He was very strict. He was a very, very powerful kind of personality that was able to draw these people in. You have to be as a cult leader, of course. There's so many psychological studies and stuff on how certain people become cult leaders and why, and all the psychology behind that. She basically carried out a lot of his teachings, and when they were also living together and raising some of the children in the group, in their specific home, the one that was traveling around trying to evade the law, she had, during the flirty fishing, when all the women were going out and having sex with non-members to bring them into the group, she had sex with, I think, a Latin American man and had a son, which they called Davidito. And they created a book basically detailing how they were raising him. And it was meant in this beautiful way, like, look how we're raising this kid. But he was being sexually abused the entire time. So from like a toddler's age, he was being abused. He engaged in sexual acts with his. So that's incest right there. Again, incestuous thoughts are a big thing at the beginning anyway. David Berg had sexual fantasies about his mother. And when he would go to heaven, have sexual encounters with her. This man was completely deranged. Luckily, the incestuous thing was not prevalent. It was not something that he was encouraging members really to do. He loved to display and give details about his life, about what he was doing in his home with the people that he was living with. The thing that a lot of people took from his teachings was sexual encounters with children and sexually abusing children was considered totally okay, and Jesus blessed it, and Jesus had no problem with it. So
Yeah.
so Karen Zerby was she had to rebrand. So she rebranded. She's totally fine. I mean, she's left. She still has all of our money. Like every member basically was sending their home, like their where they were living. We were sending money to them constantly. So she's rich. She's rich and she's operating. She has a website and she's operating totally fine. And she has to live with, and I don't think she cares, but she has to live with the fact that her son, Davidito, who eventually changed his name to Ricky Rodriguez, she has to live with the fact that this boy grew up and in his 30s made a videotape with surrounded by guns saying that he was ready to hunt her down and kill her for what she did to him. I mean, this is someone that was severely traumatized from young. This is all over. If you research it, it's all over YouTube. You can find the video. It's public information. He ended up locating his nanny, which was called, her name was Angela Smith, and he ended up brutally murdering her before going into his car, driving to a secluded spot and shooting himself in the head. She has to live with this stuff. She has to live with the fact that these teachings became prevalent and that so many children have committed suicide. Like I can't even count how many members we've lost track of how many members have lost their lives. And a part of me is doing this interview right now and sitting with you right now for the members that have committed suicide, for people like Abe, for people like a friend of mine called Gabriel, was someone I grew up with in the cult who committed suicide not just a couple of years ago. A guy called Richard, that my family grew up with. So many of these names, I could list them off. Mary Berg, the one that was the granddaughter of the leader who he sexually abused, who's also dead. I mean, she passed away. She didn't commit suicide. But like I'm saying, there's so many layers to this.
So where's she holed up now? Where does she?
She's in America, so she's American, and she is somewhere in America. I don't know. She has a lot of money, so I'm sure she's very litigious. A couple years ago, there was a documentary that came out called Children of the Cult, and for anyone watching, it's available on Discovery Plus, I believe. Also just online. You can also download it or buy it. I'm not sure. And three of the ex-members, one called Verity from Ireland, one called Hope Bastine, and Celeste Jones, embarked on a mission, and it was done in this documentary, embarked on a mission to locate some of their abusers and put them behind behind bars. Verity, the one from Ireland, was sexually abused by her own father. He's been arrested. I don't know if he's gotten time behind bars. I can't remember exactly. Hope Bastine, luckily, she got one of her abusers called Derek Lincoln. They tracked him down thanks to a lot of the information that she could provide the police in England. He's been jailed now for 11 years for sexually abusing and physically abusing Hope Bastine and like 30 other children from the group. So this is amazing work that we're doing. So we're after this. There's people that are right now doing stuff to catch.
So what do you think the main misconceptions that people have about the children of God and cults in general are?
I think they have this feeling that if they find out or they get to know someone from a cult and from our cult, that we are, I don't know, maybe freaks or strange people who are completely stunted, have no idea how to operate in the real world. And we were also one positive thing that at least I can see from the group, because I've working with a therapist right now. I'm trying to obviously see and confront some of the traumas, but also see how make peace with some of the things that maybe weren't as traumatic. And we've lived successful lives. A lot of us have gone on to be very successful, gone into great careers, And well, of course, there's the ones that committed suicide. We still have a lot of success stories. So I think we're, you know what I mean? We I don't know. I think a lot of us, the ones that basically reached out to healthcare professionals and psychologists have been able to really bounce back from some of the trauma. And I don't know, we're just like anybody else. I don't know. We're just trying to make it work in the real world, just like everybody else is, I guess. I don't know.
What made you decide to? I mean, I love that you did that, but what made you decide to get therapy?
So to get therapy, it was a whole multitude of things, I guess. It's the trauma of having to leave a cult. Like, I don't know if people talk about this so much. There's trauma within a cult, but we're also talking about the trauma of having that ripped away from you, to go from one day to having all these people around you, all this love and support, and of course a lot of other terrible things, and physical, and obviously in some cases sexual abuse. But there was also, it was like this community, this tight-knit group of people that had your back in a lot of ways, that were there for you, that and had the trauma of having to leave that weird brainwashed way of living environment to going out into the real world. There's a lot of that is traumatic. So I spent many years, when I was still living in England, I spent many years trying just to ignore it, put it to the side. But of course, all these things were cropping up. I was wondering why, for example, I couldn't hold down a job. I kept bouncing from job to job. And from the work I've done with my therapist, that's a lot to do with all the traveling I did from a young age. Traveling from, as a young child, so much to so many different continents, it does something to your psyche as a child. It doesn't prime you or help you get into a secure way of living in one place. I would want to travel still. I'd want to keep traveling and moving around. But that was just the after effects or the side effects of being raised in the cult, like the Children of God. And I think that has been a big reason why I started going to therapy. And another reason is just, I have a lot of anxiety and a lot of some PTSD as well from the cult and what I went through, and the weird things that I witnessed and saw and had to read about, from a young age. We had a lot of this literature, like I said before, which depicted young children engaging in sexual acts, depicted free love and all of this stuff, and very sexually charged imagery in the videos that we watched and circulated within the group. That I had to sort of understand, like, what is this? This is completely not right. And of course, I feel like I would deprogram from the cult quite successfully, but there's still a lot of blind spots that I have about trying to remember some of the good things, and then remembering, like, no, there was, that was wrong. That was an evil situation as well. Permissive behavior like that is unacceptable. So it's a weird dichotomy in that way that I've had to suss out, and having a therapist has really helped.
Oh, good. I'm glad. The Children of God was able to spread through 70 different countries with over 10,000 active members at its peak. What do you think made it one of the more popular cults?
I think one of the things was the free love aspect. The fact that especially during the 80s, like I said, when a lot of the women were going out and having sexual encounters with non-members to bring them in, a lot of men really gravitated towards the group, because the women, even when they were not doing that, the way that they presented themselves going out into the streets and just talking to random people, they made sure to present themselves well and to be flirtatious. I think a lot of groups, they don't do that. A lot of cults, they don't really do that in that way. They don't really. But the women appeal to these men's carnal desires and wants. So we brought them in. And of course, a common term that a lot of cults and a lot of cult members or people who know about cults know is a term called love bombing, which is really like encasing and surrounding a person that you want to have them join with lots of love, big hugs, and let your feelings out, let your emotions out. Jesus loves you, and we're here for you. And I guess, I don't know, we went through a lot of that, and a lot of you know what I mean? A lot of the members, they were able to join and express themselves in a very free way. It was very free. It was very exciting for the top members, of course, not for the kids. We were the ones that suffered, but the members up at the top got to live this exciting life of traveling, of going to rich areas, and going to rich people and talking to them about the group and getting good results. We had a good system in place. And of course, we also did missionary work. When I was in Ghana for a year, when I was young, just around the time, just before the time where the group was kind of shutting down, we opened a school for homeless children. We did a lot of different activities like that, and took on different projects like that, and involved the locals in that. And I think that was very beneficial in helping the people see, like, oh wow, this group is not just not just a little group or whatever. They're also doing things to better society. So I think that's one of the reasons why.
Do you think all the media attention the cult has had throughout the years has helped or hindered its perception?
Or population, you mean? Or sorry, popularity, I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird one. And that's a really hard thing for me to kind of process. I think a lot of young members to process is that how can a group that basically, like, I mean, I could go into so much detail about, like, I'm not going to obviously do it because there's a lot to go through. And if anyone's interested, there's a website called xfamily.org that you can also gain access to a lot of like the intricacies if you're interested in doing like a deep dive on the cult that I was raised in. But one of the things that that doesn't sit right with me is that so many members remained in the cult after having children being taken away forcefully in the night. Like, there were raids. It was literal raids where Child Protective Services and the police came in and took some of these children away. And the parents didn't know if they were going to get their children back. They had to fight in court for their children to come back to them. And this was something that happened, and it didn't slow down popularity. It didn't slow down the members joining. And I think it's this whole idea of, I don't know, of cults being so alluring to some people. Some people are so naive going into these things, and the persecution, as we called it, we spun it in a way that basically was like, well, this is a sign that God is pushing us to keep doing this work. You know what I mean? We're being the Bible verse as well, persecuted for righteousness' sake. Like, we were righteous in what we were doing. We were right in allowing children, for example, to be sexually abused. We were right in all of these ways. So it didn't matter what the police or the authorities were saying or what they were trying to do. We needed to keep going. It was a sign that God was testing us, and we had to keep going with this. So it really doesn't sit right with me that so many members, my parents included, remained in this group even after. I mean, of course, they changed a lot of things. They tightened up. They started to make it an excommunicable an offense if people were found out to be with children or have weird sexual encounters or whatever. It became something that you could be removed for. But still, it's just, yeah, it's truly bizarre. It's truly bizarre to me.
So the group claimed at one point to have reformed and done away with its more controversial aspects, like you just said. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so they did in a lot of respects, but in some of the leadership homes, because we had leadership, we had the main home or the main commune was, of course, where the leaders were living. Then we had and like level 2 was kind of all the people that kind of ran the logistics of the group, producing a lot of the publications and a lot of the entertainment factors and a lot of the things that we would go out and sell or that we would watch. So a lot of those top homes, I don't believe, and from what I've heard, people who grew up in those homes, I don't believe that those teachings ever really left. Some of that stuff just carried on. But for the media's sake and for the public's sake, we talked about how that was put away. But in the lower homes, in all the homes that I lived in, I never witnessed or heard of those things happening. The main thing, those controversial things were taken away for kind of the general population of the cult. But and I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. I didn't have to go through that. But the physical abuse, they also said, was taken away. And that's something that's a lie. That is something that no matter what they say, we've experienced it. We know what happened to us. We know what went on. And that was something that didn't change.
What's the status of the Children of God nowadays? Is it still going strong?
No. So after the reboot, after the rebrand, and everyone kind of joining society, normal society, and going to school, getting jobs, we had there's just like a website now. It's a private kind of portal or website or a forum, where some of the people who still love the group, who are still brainwashed by the cults, can congregate there, from all around the world, and like send prayer requests to each other, or say like, can you pray for me with this? It's a very small little tight knit online thing at the moment, but who knows? I mean, I have not been in contact with any of that side of it, only with ex-members. So I don't know if maybe there's still places where it's a little bit up and running in little pockets around the world. And of course, I'm sure Karen Zerby has some sort of little thing going as well with some homes or some things. I don't really know what she's done prior. She's very private in that way.
And what have you done with your life since leaving the cult? What do you do now?
Like I said, I went to school. I went to secondary school. I went to college. I went to university, and had just a variety of jobs, working in customer service, basically, just trying to make sense of the world and trying to just kind of go through it and get through whatever, try and make the best of a bad situation growing up in something like the Children of God. And I have a good life, all things considered, I would say. Getting therapy, of course, is a big help. I currently live in Denmark now, and on the way to starting some side hustles. I'm also an English tutor, so I do that online, self-employed, whatever. I have my own little business going. So I have little different things going on. My older siblings are all doing very well. A lot of them are in great careers and are very successful. And our family is kind of one of the lucky ones. There's other families that have been completely torn apart by the cults. Like I said, many have committed suicide. A lot of the parents are so brainwashed still that they completely have cut out their children out of their lives. They call them backsliders, which basically means that once they've left, they're dead to us. They're dead to the group. So certain families have that. So, but yeah, for me, I'm doing well. I'm on to bigger and better things, and yeah.
Good. I'm glad. What advice would you give to others who are born into cults and want to leave them behind?
I would say get into therapy. I would say actively try to work on looking within, seeing what maybe some blind spots you have, how you viewed your time in whatever cult you're in or you were in, and deprogram yourself. Like, work actively to see where things were wrong in the way that you were born and raised, or in the group that you joined as an adult, and really really work as well on creating a very good support system around you, good friends, work colleagues, or whatever. And yeah, I think I think just mainly therapy. I mean, there are psychologists out there that are trained in deprogramming cult members and with cults and how to deal with that. It's very prevalent, especially in America. There has been a lot of cults, so that kind of stuff is very encouraged. A lot of the people that committed suicide from the group, they were so traumatized and so afraid to face the realities of what they went through that they languished and dealt with it all on their own. A lot of them, they cut out all those people from their lives and went into the world just, cold turkey. And a lot of them, unfortunately, were the ones that couldn't make it. They couldn't hack it. They've been through so much, and they couldn't do it. So I would say make sure you have people around you that you can ask for help and can help you.
Yeah, and that, it's really good. Really good advice. What's your take on modern movements such as QAnon and that some people class as a cult?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a lot of groupthink is something that I'm really against. Obviously, in some ways, maybe it can be beneficial, but I think when people get too encased in a community or an online community or whatever it is, QAnon, I think it's very permissive and very dangerous because you have your blinders on. When you're in a group like that, when you're in a community like that, you only want to see the positives of what the community you're involved in is doing, and you're not looking and taking a skeptical look at what is happening, what you're involved in, what you're reading, what you're digesting through Twitter or Reddit forums or whatever it is, Discord servers, whatever it can be. And I think it's super important to weigh up your options, to stay skeptical. You know what I mean? To stay an individual as much as possible. To weigh up the the left hand side of politics and the right hand. Personally, I'm conservative. I'm gay, but I'm conservative. So I really, but it's also very strange. I'm also really kind of against the whole transgender agenda right now with like drag queen story hours for kids, and because it triggers me seeing anybody trying to groom children or play up this whole thing of like, let's normalize um expressing your gender in however way you want, you know what I mean, identifying as they them or she her when you're a boy as a very young child. That triggers me because I've seen the way that grooming can affect a child within a cult, within a community. And I think it's very permissive, and I think it's very dangerous, and I think people need to be aware of that, need to be keep their stay self-aware, basically, you know what I mean.
I have a feeling that that last minute could get really dicey in the comments. Because it is one of those subjects where you're like, oh shit, like I have a million questions. I don't know who to ask, and I don't know if I'm allowed to ask. And then like, this is a topic that came up at work the other day because somebody I work in and around identifies as a they them. I have questions, and it immediately started a turf war. So like straight away, as soon as you start saying that, I'm like, oh shit.
I think so. Listen, my stance on it is basically, as an adult, go for it. Do what you want to do. Like, if you're going to identify as something, go for it. It's it's a free country, it's a free world, free speech, all of that. I support that. But when some of these people are promoting it to children, that's what I'm saying, and people don't realize there's an underlying thing where some of them, I'm not saying all of them, live your truth. If you want to do something, if you want to transition and be, you know what I mean, transition and be transgender, that's on you. But as a people were like trans activists going after someone like J.K. Rowling, threatening her, going down to her address, and you know what I mean, wishing death upon her just because her as a biological woman is standing up for women, trying to protect people and protect women in their own spaces, like women's sports, for example, where transgender people can just join in after a couple months of being on hormones or whatever, and they're winning all of these things. They're winning in swimming contests, winning first place over real women. To me, that hurts. To me, even as a gay person, to me that hurts.
Yeah, like the Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox was the male MMA fighter that transitioned around the age of 30 and just started just hammering women. And it's not even like they were a skilled fighter. They were just big and strong and had lived for the first 30 years with testosterone and all these other things running through their body. So they get in the cage, and it's very, very scary. It's very scary that was a thing that was allowed to happen and was accepted, especially when you see this person running through their division. Like, to me, I find in sports especially, I find that terrifying. I find that really, really scary.
And a lot of women do as well. A lot of these women are very scared too. Like, for example, I don't know if people have heard of Riley Gaines. She's a swimmer, and I believe she was attacked for her trying to protect this, her sport, protect women's sports from these transgender people who have gone in. And a lot of transgender people that I know are conservative themselves. A great one is Blair White, who has a YouTube channel here on YouTube, and a lot of them, they just want to live their lives. They're transgender, but they just want to live their lives in peace and quiet, and that I commend. That's fine. But like I said, when you're like a transgender woman and you're going into a women's prison, to me that is completely unacceptable, and it's actually crazy. Like in England, it's happened already.
Yeah, and the swimming, this was a competition recently, where they weren't informed there was going to be somebody who had transitioned from male to female competing in this division. And there's a video online of the accepting the award, and the women that were there just clapping. They're very, very polite. They handle it very well, but you could see that they're hurt. They weren't informed of this. They weren't asked if they, you know what I mean. And this person's came in, cleared them all out and straight away. And it does leave you with questions, you know?
And I think as well, people might be surprised, me being an openly gay man, why I might be holding some of the beliefs that I do. But there's a whole community out there of gay conservatives. And basically tying this back in with growing up in a cult, I realized that the whole woke culture and the whole LGBTQIA plus whatever, some of their agendas were very, very cult-like. They were very cult-like. The way that they present themselves, these activists, the way that they go out there ready to fight. Like you can see this on TikTok. There's non-binary or whatever that are really there to like fight against the system or whatever it is. And to me that's disturbing. I had to kind of deprogram myself from that as well as a gay man and come to terms with that. And I'm just individual now. I want to be a free thinker. I want to be somewhere in the middle of all this political discourse and whatever's going on in society. I want to take from both sides what's positive and what's not positive, and not get into groupthink, not get into another cult that I've already escaped from a cult. I don't want to get into another one.
Well, now that you've got all of this, and now you've got this movement where this side's happening, it creates parallels, because then you have the Tate movement, which, I mean, whatever you think of Andrew Tate, fair enough. But then you end up with subsets. And now you've got a subset of, they started appearing on my social media of just these absolute dickheads that are just, they're sexist, they're rude, they're like the alpha male where, you know what I mean? Like women have to be a certain way, act a certain way, but we're going to go out and cheat. And we're going to sleep with everyone that we want to, but you're not allowed to, stay at home. And it creates this subset of like, so now you've got like the complete polar opposite of like, do you know what I mean? And it is, you're seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, I think Andrew Tate and those kind of, alpha male types, I think they're just a symptom of what's going on inside this like extreme feminism, for example, that's like very hating of men, completely dismissing men's mental health, you know what I mean? Like ignoring what men are going through and focusing so entirely on their own agenda, what they are trying to speak about, you know what I mean? And same with the whole LGBTQIA community as well. They can be so aggressive sometimes. And I think this is a response from straight men who are like, wait a second, this is getting too crazy. Let's go back a bit to like more traditional values. And I'm not saying what Andrew Tate is all about is
no. I'm not dissing Andrew Tate. I'm not dissing Andrew Tate.
No, I know, but
like,
you know what I mean.
But there's the people, but there's then what's happened is there's people that have seen him, taken a few bits and gone, okay, I'm going to take this bit, and I'm going to project my version of it. And I'm seeing all these other people popping up, and you're like, I don't know, you're looking at counters, basically, different people that are, you know what I mean?
It's to me, it's shocking. And like I said, I think it's so important to parse out like what's going on in society, take stock of it, not get stuck into one specific way of thinking and seeing the world. It's so destructive. You become so encased in this disturbing thing where you're like waking up every morning angry, going on Twitter, trying to attack people just for expressing their views. And it's getting violent now. Like we're getting into like violent things where like transgender people are attacking women. They're threatening women. They're literally putting hands on women and calling themselves women. Like it doesn't make any sense anymore. Things are all like, to me, kind of topsy-turvy at the moment. And I just want like a little more sanity, especially in the community that I feel like I'm a part of. But I've actually been removed from certain like online gay communities because they're like, you're conservative, you're out. It's like, wait a second, I belong here too. I just have some different political leanings. I don't want to hate on anyone. I don't wish death on anybody. I'm just here expressing myself and what I believe. You know what I mean?
Something happened a few years ago where we went from being able to debate and I can hear an opinion, and it might mean I might not agree with it, but that doesn't mean we're enemies straight away. But this device happened where it immediately became, well, I don't agree with you, you must be my enemy. And it's terrifying. It is so scary.
How can a society like properly function when you have this new generation growing up with TikTok, social media, Twitter, Reddit, where they're learning, their way of learning the world and how to operate within the world and this normal society is, like you just said, not being able to engage in productive you know what I mean, productive, polite discussions where it's like, well, I can see where you're coming from. I hold a different point of view, but let's not be, you know, acrimonious about it. Let's not get angry at each other to the point that we see each other from across the room and we hate that person. Like, what is all this hatred? What is all this like personal attacks? That I don't get.
But this is it. So I wanted to ask because like in the environment I'm working in, so where I was like obviously my post, my social media, I'm an online like fitness coach. So been a boxing coach for years, online, just, you know, we do a bit of everything. And my question is, because this conversation came up, well, if I'm training somebody, I need to know obviously the gender, because I need to tailor your nutrition to not only to your gender, but to, you know, to everything. So this conversation came up and this woman starts screaming at me. She's like, well, how many genders are there? And I'm like, well, hang on a second. It's important. She's like, well, what do you know? And I'm like, well, no, stop shouting at me. I want to know so that I can tailor the programs that I'm doing. If I've got somebody that's coming to me and it's like, you know, a certain way, but looks, and I need to, and now I'm scared to navigate it, because if I give a 5'5" woman a nutrition plan tailored for, it's going to be different no matter what. So you end up just like, I end up just getting screamed at, and I'm like, I don't know what to say
See,
now.
this is the thing. Okay, this is the thing about the LGBT community and what you're talking about. I think the problem is you have a huge, I would say not a huge majority, you have probably a majority of them that are very chill. If you ask them their pronouns, they will just casually say it. They're there and open to educate people. Do you know what I mean? They're there
Yeah.
to not even just educate, but inform people, willing to take questions from people who are just genuinely curious. And then you have a very vocal minority who are activists, who call themselves activists, but all they're doing is trying to impose and force their own beliefs and views on the world and their views on gender and sexuality onto people, and will get very aggressive. And those are the people that I think a lot of people in the LGBTQ community are too afraid to call out. But their actions are giving us a bad reputation. A lot of us, like I said, there's a lot of transgender women and men who just want to live their life. They're not there to make a spectacle of themselves. They don't want to get on the cover of Time magazine and make a whole, you know, interview about all the intricacies about their you know, their whatever surgeries they've gotten or hormones. They're just there to live their life, and they just want to be left alone. And those are the ones that I can support. Those are the ones that I see, wow, they're, you know, they're just living their life. They just want to have a good life, and that's what they believe is what they want to do. But it's the vocal minority right now that are taking over. And I think it's very permissive. I think it's very dangerous for young kids to get into it. And like I said, again, that goes back to grooming of children. I don't think it's right for young children to go into a drag show and see them twerking and wearing very sexually provocative clothing. You wouldn't take a child to a strip club. You wouldn't take your child to see any of that kind of stuff in those ways. But for some reason, drag queen story hours and drag queen shows is totally okay for a kid. And there's pictures of them out there on Google of kids walking up and giving dollar bills to these performers. No, to me, that's
I forgot how to speak. The drag queen story time. This is an online movement. No, I keep seeing this pop up. Did I make that up? Did I?
No, it's a huge thing right now, especially in America. They're really fighting for it. There's actually states right now that are working on laws to say that children should not be in these positions, and if adults are allowing it, they could be prosecuted, or they can get in trouble in these communities. In some of the more Republican states, you know, they're very concerned, and I think there's something about this transgender movement and these activists that are not prioritizing children's and protecting children. They're not. They're not protecting them. They're trying to influence them. They're trying to take them away from their parents in that way, and like discuss certain things that are completely not, these children are not ready for. And again, because of what I went through, seeing like friends of mine being beaten, and I saw the same thing, but you know what I mean? Seeing children being groomed or brainwashed in a cult, like how I was raised, I prioritize so much the protection and the sanity of young children. And I want them to grow up very innocently and to get to an age where when they're ready to be exposed to some of these things, then it's, you know, fair play. But when they're children, like parents need to be so careful what they get involved in, what communities they involve their children in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we leave, I want to ask what you think the future holds for you.
So there are some of the people who have left the cult that actually make it their mission to raise awareness about this cult and want to put away, actively search and want to put away and get some of these abusers behind bars. That is not really my mission, at least not now. I haven't really felt that. I'm here just to kind of raise awareness in a way and hopefully shed some light on what's going on, what has gone on in the cult, and again get into the topic of groupthink and modern day kind of cults, as it were, and raise awareness from that, and to people to see from what I and my experience, what they can maybe learn from in their own lives and how they navigate the world. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm looking forward to getting onto a career. I've thought about becoming a kindergarten teacher here in Denmark. I have some plans. I'm still young, I guess, and I'm still working on some stuff, but I'm hopeful for the future and excited for what it's gonna show me.
So before we started, I put a post out online, and I want to ask just one of these questions. Okay. Okay. Let me, because there's not much context. So obviously, the time your cult started, and then obviously through the 70s and through the 80s, what effect did the Charlie Manson and their cult have on yours?
That's an interesting question. From what I've heard, there's some talk about how the Manson cult and what they did with Sharon Tate and the whole situation that they got involved in was kind of one of the catalysts for the hippie movement disintegrating and becoming something that was considered very disturbing and weird, and their lifestyles were becoming a little bit, they were not integrated into society properly. They were doing drugs or whatever the case was. And I think for the group, I think for the Children of God, I think that maybe they started to tone down on some of the hippie, being associated with the hippies, and kind of started to get some leadership, to get some sort of like rules in place, started to kind of rein things in a little bit. And obviously this was early days when this happened in the cult and when the Manson family and all that stuff. But I don't know. I think the cult would have operated not that much differently regardless of that. That's kind of my opinion.
Was there ever any crossover?
No. The cult was from a complete different way and different mindset. What I also didn't mention was, we were kind of a doomsday cult a little bit, because the founder also believed that maybe in the 90s at some point that the world was gonna, that Jesus was gonna come back and, start heaven on earth, and we were gonna get, like I said before, the superpowers and all of that. But there was nothing about it that was criminal in that way, which was anything to do with murder or whatever. We really believed in God and all of that stuff, and so peace as much as possible. And
thank you very much. Do you have anything that you want to add before we throw it out?
So going back to what I was saying, watch that documentary, Children of the Cult, Discovery Plus, I believe it's on. Look into what Hope Bastine is doing and some of these other people who are the spokespeople for our cult and for ex-cult members. And if anyone's interested and curious, there's a lot of information out there online about the cult. If you're curious, I'm just here as well on behalf of children around the world. I just think children should be protected, because I didn't feel protected. I grew up in a cult. I wasn't afforded that luxury of having people protecting me and protecting me from like scary things and disturbing activities. So I think it's so important to protect the children and to keep them away from any kind of groupthink, any kind of weird communities or cults or whatever. Just be aware of what you're getting into, what kind of information you're getting from the internet.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.